Hello there, and welcome for the errors of episode 2 of the Chernobyl series. This is Ole from another side. Obviously, a spoiler alert is in effect. Now, let's start. The second episode begins with a great poem by Konstantin Simonov. It is about soldiers seeing and remembering all the land and people they left behind, understanding that they are waiting for them to come back and liberate them, and being proud of their land and dying for it. Now I want to say that the creators of the series did an excellent job at casting and makeup. The characters of the series look very similar to their prototypes. I am pointing this out for a reason. We are introduced to a new heroine, the scientist Ulyana Khamyuk. The creators of the series say that this is a collective image of all scientists, but it reminds me more of this person. This is Svetlana Alexievich, and the series is based on her book, Voices from Chernobyl or Chernobyl Prayer. Now, let me tell you about my acquaintance with her as a writer. I was in high school when I read her famous work Zinc Boys, about soldiers who fought in Afghanistan. Before writing this book, Alexievich conducted several interviews with the veterans and then published this book. And the book was very emotional, it actually hit me. But I was so much disappointed when I found out, a few years after that many soldiers later claimed that they didn't say the things she wrote in the book. A group of soldiers' mothers even sued her, but she got away with it because she claimed that the book was a work of art. In addition, there's an interview that Lyudmila Ignatenko, the wife of the fireman Vasily Ignatenko, gave to the BBC. Svetlana Alexievich wrote the book about Chernobyl the same way as she did with Zinc Boys. She first took several interviews and then wrote a book based on them. So Lyudmila Ignatenko says that Svetlana Alexievich wrote a lot of lies in the book. But Alexievich again justifies this by saying that this is a work of art. This is somewhat surprising for me, since in one of the interviews Craig Mazin, the creator of the series, said that he didn't want to add drama and tragedy to the series, since in the story itself there was enough drama and tragedy already. But all that Alexievich does in her works is just adding drama and tragedy to any situation she writes about. And to base the series on her work is nothing but that. And all scenes with Ulyana Khamyuk are entirely fictional. Although the creators claim that she represents other scientists, that is not true. Later in the episode, a smart nurse stops a doctor from treating his patients with milk. So you're telling me that a doctor in a hospital in a town where everything revolves around a nuclear power plant does not have a clue about radiation, serving a fireman who came from the nuclear power plant, and then she undresses him with her bare hands despite the fact that she already showed her awareness of the radiation. The whole scene seems idiotic to me. Again, back in those years, exercises, training alarms were constantly conducted and people knew about radiation and its danger. For instance, when I was in high school, we had basic military training classes, and our teacher, a former Soviet army officer, literally kicked our butts while training us how to quickly put on chemical protection suits. And we had to learn how to protect ourselves from radiation. That was in 2005, long after the USSR, and I can only imagine how they trained people back then. Then they show a meeting in the Kremlin led by Gorbachev. Sherbina was also shown to be present, although in reality neither he nor Legasov were there. Legasov in the audio recording says that he learned about the incident at noon, and then he was told to be at Vnukovo airport at 4 p.m. There was no such meeting. So the scene was inserted, it seems to me, for propaganda purposes. Let me be clear here, I do not mind propaganda. I'm totally fine with it, but only if you understand that this is propaganda. Just like with rules for a real professional, you can only break them if you know them. Later, instead of going by an airplane, they board a helicopter. Although the distance from Moscow to Chernobyl is not less than 700 kilometers. Helicopters do not usually fly so far, and in fact they flew to Kiev in an airplane. but the helicopter is not accidental there, nor are the guards. By the way, there are way too many guards in the series. You can see them in almost half of all scenes. In reality, Sherbina might have had, I am not even sure about this, a guard from the Department 9 of KGB. Department 9 specialized on security of the highest officials of the country. But even if he did have a guard, the guard wouldn't have been dressed like this. He would look like a civilian. So here comes the scene in the helicopter where Sherbina rudely orders Legasov to explain how the reactor works, or he will order the soldiers to drop him from the helicopter. I'm pretty sure that he himself knew something about how a power plant works, since he was an engineer with a higher education, albeit in the oil field. In addition, it is unlikely that a soldier would do this without the order of his immediate commander. Sherbina is not a military man, and he could not order this to the military personnel. Sherbina then orders the pilot to fly over the reactor, and man, I don't even know what to say. By the way, how do they manage to talk in a helicopter without headphones? It's very loud in there. Legasov in his audio recording says that they actually were discussing the 3 Mile Island accident while flying on the plane, and that in this case most likely was not similar to Chernobyl due to the difference in design. Let me just tell you a couple of words about Sherbina so that you could understand what a man he actually was. He was in charge of the construction of the Irkutsk hydroelectric power plant in 1958, the construction of the Bratsk hydroelectric power in 1954. He was in charge of building 2 towns, Angarsk and Shelihov, as well as Angarsk petrochemical plant in 1955. In fact, he raised the whole economy of Western Siberia, and today's wealth that Russia has from selling oil and gas is the result of his efforts. He dealt with the Chernobyl accident, and 2 years later he dealt with the disaster in Armenia, when an earthquake killed tens of thousands of people. He was sent to the most important jobs because he was a high-level professional. His driver noted, for example, that it was rarely possible to talk with him, since on the road he constantly read letters or magazines on various topics, from economics to culture and history. This was a top-class professional who can only be praised, and that is why it is sad that he is so undeservedly slandered. Let me quote from Legasov's notes about what he thought about Sherbina. First of all, I want to say that probably the choice of Boris Yevdokimovich Sherbina as the chairman of the government commission turned out to be successful, because he possesses such a quality as a mandatory appeal to the point of view of specialists. He quickly grasps these points of view and immediately capable of making a decision. He is not characterized by slowness or timidity in the adoption of certain decisions. It is very easily noticeable in the emergency setting. Legasov gives an example of Sherbina's character by telling such story. The scientists first estimated that they would need 200 tons of lead, so Sherbina ordered the batch. But later Legasov understood that this amount wouldn't be enough. So Sherbina asked him how much he wanted again, and Legasov asked for 2,000 tons. Later it turned out that Sherbina ordered 6,000 tons, just in case there could be some sort of miscalculation. Then they show the fireman's wife, Lyudmila Ignatenko. She finds out that her husband is in Moscow. However, she says that she is not allowed to go to Moscow. This is not true. There were no such prohibitions. Next, the scene of Sherbina's arrival. Bryukhanov calls General Pikalov like a garçon. Now, Colonel General Pikalov is actually the organizer and leader of Soviet chemical forces. I really doubt that some plant director could talk like that to any of Soviet generals. Then Pikalov drives a truck with foil on it, and it looks so stupid, especially if you know that there are special chemical reconnaissance vehicles, and they were used there. Then Pikalov went on the reconnaissance and says that radiation level is at 15,000 Röntgen. although in reality the highest they registered was 3000 Röntgen. In general, the whole picture is shown as if they were alone there and didn't know what to do. But the creators could listen to Legasov himself. Here's an excerpt from the audio recording. Boris Yevdokimovich Sherbina immediately called for chemical forces that arrived quite quickly, led by General Pikalov and helicopter units located nearby in Chernihiv. A group of helicopters arrived, led by General Antoshkin, who was the chief of staff from the relevant Air Force unit. Overflights and inspections of the external state of the 4th block began. The Government Commission, the meeting of which was very energetic, in manner characteristic to him, was held by Boris Yevdokimovich Sherbina, immediately divided all the members of the Government Commission into groups, each of which had to solve its own problem. The first group, led by Alexander Grigorievich Mishkov, who was also a member of the Government Commission. This group was to begin to identify the causes of the accident. The second group, led by Comrade Abagyan, was supposed to determine and organize all dosimetric measurements in the station area, in the power plant area, and in the city of Pripyat and surrounding areas. Next, civil defense groups. At this time, General Ivanov appeared, who headed the civil defense service of that region and should have begun preparatory measures for the possible evacuation of the population and primarily decontamination work. General Berdov, who headed the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic, had to act in terms of keeping the order in the affected area. I myself went in and headed a group whose goal was to develop measures aimed at localizing the accident. The group of Yevgeny Ivanovich Vorobyov was assigned to deal with the sick and the whole range of medical measures. Later in the episode, Sherbina went to get sand and boron for Legasov. In fact, the boron was right at the power plant already. On that day, he only had to get boron and dolomite. And of course, they have to show people drinking the non-existent vodka. In the morning, we see the scene of helicopters dropping boron and sand with dolomite. In fact, helicopters were allowed to operate only at a height of at least 200 meters. And of course, that's seen with a helicopter crash. First of all, there was no crane there in April. In fact, the fall did occur, but it happened 6 months later, in November 1986. But the creators just had to show these people as idiots. And again, there was no black smoke. Then comes the scene in the hotel where Legasov and Sherbina discussed the situation. In fact, the situation was, at least according to Legasov, that they couldn't allow people to get a dose of 75 Röntgen in a short period of time. At a dose from 25 to 75 Röntgen, a decision must be made urgently, and with these figures, even local authorities have power to start evacuation. At lower doses, the decision should be made by higher authorities. On April 26, when they arrived, the readings in the town were normal, from 5 to 50 milliröntgen per hour, which is already a bit much, but not disastrous. In the evening of the same day, they already knew the numbers, and Sherbina gave the order to prepare for the evacuation. It began at 2 p.m. of the following day. For this, 1,100 buses were assembled. A route, facilities, accommodation, and food were prepared. This was a big operation, and it certainly did not happen because Sherbina was comparing Soviet children to German children. It was an educated decision based on the data received. Usually, even with such events, they never evacuate too quickly, as people usually die from panic. In 3 Mile Island, for example, 17 people died because of panic. In Fukushima, 1,348, also from panic. People did not die from radiation. The most victims were always from panic, and that was precisely what they tried to avoid in Pripyat. Then we see the scene where Khamyuk speaks to Gorbachev. She warns that uranium can reach water under the reactor and cause an explosion of 4 megatons. This is strange because then we would not build bombs, but would just throw nuclear fuel directly into the ocean next to the enemy. An explosion was not the danger. The fact that water could turn into vapor and start lifting radioactive particles into the air was the real danger, and that is what they were trying to avoid. In fact, the Commission knew about water from the very beginning. It was no secret to anyone. In addition, Legasov himself in the audio says that no second explosion could have happened. The process of vaporization could happen, and this steam would begin to carry out radioactive particles. The chance for this was very low, but the government decided to close this risk anyway. Then they asked Gorbachev for permission to kill 3 people, since they will have to drain the water. The volunteers then are offered 400 rubles. I am more than sure that even without this remuneration, there would be volunteers. But in reality, they didn't look for volunteers. 3 men, Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov and Boris Baranov, were chosen to do the job. They were chosen because they were on duty on that day and they knew all the ways at the plant. The passage for them was drawn in such manner so that they would receive the least dose of radiation. So the highest level they experienced was 10 Röntgen per hour. And they didn't have to ask Gorbachev to kill 3 people since they did not die. In fact, Baranov died in 2005 and the other 2 are still alive. This is it for episode 2. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please write them below. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and your suggestions can be a great help, as I would like to have a community around this channel to discuss various things. Well, I will see you next time. Bye.